If you create a new Flutter project and open that in Android Studio, you will see something like this one, where towards the left you will see the directory structure of the project inside this window. And here notice this folder lib. Inside this folder we have to keep all the Dart files of our Flutter app. Flutter apps are written using the language called Dart, and thus inside this folder we are going to have multiple files of .dart extension. So in this default project we have only one file inside this folder named main.dart, because this project is a pretty simple one. This single file main.dart contains all the Dart code of the default app. So if you deploy this code on a device, if you execute this code, it loads an app, a pretty simple one. Now we are going to remove the code of this file main.dart and we are going to write our own code here. So let us start with the first question: how to create a screen in Flutter? And the answer is you have to create a widget. But what is a widget then? Widgets are the building blocks of a Flutter UI. If you want to display a text on the screen, you have to use a widget. If you want to display a button, then you have to use one of the different widgets that exist for displaying a button. If you want to display list of items, you have to use a widget. If you want to add some padding around a text, for that too you have to use a widget. Basically, for any UI component, you have to use a widget. And sometimes we may need to create widgets of our own. For example, in this case, to create a screen, we have to create our own widget. Let me show you how to create one. So open the file main.dart, select all and remove this existing code. Now create a class. Let's name it first screen. Extend the class statelessWidget. So in terms of code, a widget is a class that extends either the class statelessWidget or the class statefulWidget. So there are two types of widgets in Flutter: statelessWidgets and statefulWidgets. StatelessWidgets cannot be changed dynamically. StatefulWidgets can be changed dynamically. So if we have a screen or any UI component that does not change dynamically, for example, we may have an About Us page and that displays some text and that never changes. We don't change the text dynamically and we don't change any component of the layout dynamically, then a stateless widget will be the best option. But if the text changes for some reason dynamically, or maybe we change the color of the text or the color of the background or any other UI component dynamically, then we cannot use a stateless widget. Then we would have to use a stateful widget. Now let us start with a stateless widget and we shall learn how to use a stateful widget too. To create a stateless widget, we have to use the class stateless. We have to extend this class. Now we have some errors here because this file does not know about this class statelessWidget. We have to import the library containing this class. And there is a shortcut for that. You have to take the cursor to the name of the missing class, hit Alt and Enter together, and a pop-up will appear with the different options for importing. So basically, a class with this name exists in multiple packages here, multiple libraries, and we have to select the appropriate one. We are going to select the second one, material.dart, because we are going to create a material design app. Now we have one more error here, and if you take your cursor over the name of this class, then you will see the error message: missing concrete implementation of statelessWidget.build. So whenever you extend this class statelessWidget, you have to implement a function named builder. You can bring your cursor to the name, to the error message, and press Alt Enter, and the options will be suggested in a pop-up. So select this first one, create one missing overrides, and then this function will be added and we have to implement this function. So this function named build is responsible for creating the layout of this widget. And I have already told you that to display some text, you have to use the text widget. To display some button, you have to use one of the different widgets for button. And in this way, for any UI component, you have to use a widget. And a layout usually contains multiple different UI components. It may contain some text, then one button, then may have some image, right? So we have to compose different widgets together to create a layout of a widget or of a screen. So basically we have to create a tree of different widgets to represent the layout of this widget. And then we have to return that widget tree from this function build. Now if this is not clear to you at this moment, how to create a tree and all that, don't worry, because this will be clear soon. At this moment, let us simply add a return statement and return an instance of the class text. So this class text is a widget responsible for displaying some text on the screen. So we have to use an instance of the class, we have to create an instance of the class, and the text to be displayed has to be passed as the first argument of this constructor. So let us display some text. At this moment, we can say that the widget tree representing the layout of the widget first screen contains only one node, only one widget, a text widget. So with this, we have created the first screen of our app. Now, we have to load this on our device. We have to execute the code and see how does this page look like, right? And for that, we have to have our device connected. This will show here, and then we have to click on this button to execute the code. But at this moment, we cannot execute this code, and it is indicated by this cross mark here on the name of the file main.dart. So this says that this file main.dart cannot be executed at this moment. And the reason is we are missing the main function. So any Flutter code or any Dart code cannot be executed without the main function. The main function is the entry point of execution. So we have to add the main function here. Now you will notice that this cross mark disappeared, but still if you run the code, if you click on this button, nothing will happen because the main function is empty. We have to use a function named run app of the framework to load a widget on the screen. So the responsibility of this function runapp is to display a widget that is being passed to this function as the argument on the screen. So here we are going to pass an instance of the class first screen. Now click on this button to execute the code and load the app on your device. And we are getting this error because we have not specified the text direction. So we have to tell this text widget how to display the text, whether to display it from left to right or right to left, because some languages are written from right to left. So to fix this, we have to pass a value for the parameter text direction of this text constructor. So this text is a class which has different properties, and we have to provide values for the properties of our interest. In this case, we have to pass a value for the property text direction. But after a few minutes, once we develop our widget tree, you will realize that we no longer need to specify the value for text direction manually. But for now, just pass text direction.ltr to the property text direction and save the changes. And you will notice this text being displayed on the screen. But this is almost hidden under the status bar. We shall bring it to the center. And for that too, we have to use another widget of Flutter named center. We have to wrap this text widget by the widget center. So the widget center has a property called child, and the widget that we want to place at the center has to be passed to this property child. So let's return an instance of the widget center from this build function. And while creating this instance, to the parameter child of the constructor, pass the instance of our text widget. Now save, and notice the text being placed at the center. So at this moment, the widget tree representing the layout of our widget first screen contains two nodes. First is the center at the root, and then the text. But still, this does not look like a page of a material design app, right? We would like to have a page having an app bar or maybe a floating action button and something that looks a little better. And for that, we are going to use two inbuilt widgets of the Flutter framework. First, material app, and second is a scaffold. The material app widget contains some of the app level properties. So it contains the properties to customize the theme and a property for defining the home page of the app. And the widget scaffold have properties to customize the look of a page. So the scaffold widget has a property to display a floating action button, it has a property to display an app bar, it has a property to add a navigation drawer, etc. So as the material app widget contains the app level properties, we are going to create a separate widgets to have it. And for the individual pages inside the corresponding widgets, we shall use the scaffold widget. So we are going to create a new widget here. Let's name it app and extend stateless widget. Implement the build function and return an instance of the widget material app from this function. To the constructor of material app, for the parameter home, pass an instance of the widget representing our page first screen. So this is going to be the home page of our app. Now inside this main function, to the function run app, pass an instance of the widget app this time. If you save the changes now, you will notice some differences, but still this is not what we are planning to do. And for that, now inside this first screen widget, we are going to use a scaffold. At the root of this widget tree, we are going to add an instance of the widget scaffold, and this widget scaffold has a property named body. To this body, we are going to pass the widget tree that we had here. The widget tree representing the layout of the main content portion of the page. Now save this and notice the changes. Now we are also going to add an app bar, and for that, as I have already mentioned, there is a property called app bar, and to this property app bar, we have to pass an instance of another inbuilt widget named app bar. This widget app bar has a property named title. To this property title, we have to pass a text widget with a text to be displayed on the title of the app bar. Save this and you will notice an app bar on the page. Now this page looks like a material design page. Now we can customize this page as per our need by providing values for different properties. For example, there is a property named floating action button of the scaffold widget. To this, if we pass an instance of the inbuilt widget floating action button, a button will appear here. A floating action button will appear here. Now you can also remove this text direction from the text widget, because this will be taken care of by the material app widget. And with this, we have created a simple material design page for our Flutter app. This displays a single text at the center. We are going to display one button below this text now. But if you take a look at the property body of this scaffold, you will notice that we are passing the widget tree, which contains the center widget and a text as the child of the center widget. So the widget center has a property child, to which we can pass an instance of one widget. But now we are going to display two widgets here, one for the text, another for the button. So how to do that? Now comes the second question: how to display a text and a button vertically on the screen? And the answer is, we are going to use a widget called column. So in Flutter, you will find widgets that have a property child like the widget center, to which we can pass one single widget as the child of that widget. You will find widgets like text, which does not have a child. And you will find widgets which has a property named children, to which we can pass a list of widgets to be children of that widget. And column is one such widget which takes a list of widgets as the children and then it places them vertically. So pass an instance of the widget column to the property body of scaffold. This widget has a property children which takes a list of widgets. You can create a list using square brackets in Dart. Now add the first element of the list, and to this we are going to add a text widget. So create an instance of text widget and pass the text to be displayed. Add a comma and add the next widget. We are going to display a button. So use the class elevated button. You can try using the other widgets too, like outline button or text button, but here I am going to use elevated button. This widget elevated button has a property named onPressed, to which we have to pass an implementation of a function that gets executed when we press on the button. And then we have the property called child, to which we have to pass a widget which we want to be displayed inside the button. So we are going to display text, and for that we are going to pass an instance of the widget text to this property child and pass the text to be displayed. Now save the changes and notice the button and the text being displayed on the screen. Now you can try using the widget outline button. That creates a button that looks like this one, a text with an outline. Or you can try the text button, where we only have the text, but it is clickable. Now this is towards the left. To bring this to the center, we can wrap this text widget by the widget center, and here is a shortcut to wrap a widget by another. You have to take the cursor to the name of the widget that you want to wrap by some other widget and press Alt and Enter together. This pop-up will appear with defined options. So here you will find options to wrap with a particular widget like center or column or container, or you will have a generic option, wrap with a widget, where you can specify the name of the widget with which you want to wrap this widget. So here we are going to use this one, wrap with center, and save. Now the text is centered horizontally, but it is not centered vertically, and this is because the column by default takes the complete available vertical space, and we can specify this column to take the minimum required height by providing a value for the property main axis size. So there is a property called main axis size of the widget column. To this we can pass main axis size dot mean to instruct the column to take only the required space vertically, and now the text has been centered properly. Now we have a text and we have a button, but if we click on the button, nothing happens. We would like to change this text on clicking this button. Now you may already be thinking that we can create a string here to hold the message, the string to be displayed, and then inside this onPress function of the button we can change this string to a new one, to something else. But this will not work. You can give it a try, and if you click the button, nothing will change. And this is because we are using a stateless widget, and as I have mentioned earlier, we cannot make changes to a stateless widget dynamically. Now here comes the third question: how to make changes to the layout of a widget? How to change this text on clicking a button? And the answer is, we have to use a stateful widget. A stateful widget always has an associated state. But what is a state? You can think of this state as the data that represents the UI. For example, we may have a variable named background color, which may contain the color code for the background of the page. Initially it may be green, and on clicking a button we shall change the color to red. So the state of the UI changed from the background being green to the background being red. And in this case, the variable background color represents the state of the UI. We may have a string to hold some text, and on clicking a button, we may change the text and refresh the UI to reflect the changes. So the text changed from something, maybe hello world, to a new text. In this case, the string containing the text is representing the state of the UI. So this is the way we make changes dynamically to a layout in Flutter. Now for creating a stateful widget, we have to create two classes. First for the widget and another class for the state. The widget class should extend the class stateful widget, and the state class should extend a class named state. the build function is implemented inside the state class. And inside the widget class, we have to implement another function named createState. The build function of the state class is responsible for creating the UI, and the createState function of the widget class is called by the framework to associate an instance of the state with the widget. So let's try to convert our widget first screen to a stateful widget. You can do all of these things manually by creating a separate class for state and then implementing the corresponding functions. But in Android Studio, there is a very handy shortcut to do this. Take your cursor to the name of the widget, hit Alt Enter, and this pop-up will appear with this option to convert this widget to a stateful widget. Click on this and it will do all of these things for us. It will create a separate class for the state. It will move the build function to the state class, and inside this widget class, it will implement the createState function. And we have to return an instance of the state class from this function. And here you will notice that it is already done. Now here we already have a variable containing the text to be displayed, and inside the onPress function of the button, we are changing this text. But still, if you click on this button now, the text does not change. And this is happening because whenever we make changes to the state, we should inform the framework about the change. And then only the framework will call this build function to rebuild the UI. And this time, whenever this build function gets called, the new value that this variable holds will get printed. And how to inform the framework? By calling this function setState. Notice the syntax of this function. This is a function to which we are passing another function. And inside this function, we make the changes to the state. So copy this line and paste it here. Now whenever we call this function setState, the framework knows about the change in the state and it will call this build function. Save the changes, and this time notice the text being changed. How to load another screen on clicking the button of the first screen. In Flutter, the screens or the pages are called routes, and there is a class named Navigator that manages the different routes. It maintains a stack of the routes, and whenever we push a new route, whenever we need to load a new page, we ask the Navigator to push a new route to its stack, and the route at the top becomes visible to us. When we remove one page by pressing back or by calling the pop function of the Navigator, then the route from the top of the stack is removed, making the one below it visible to us. So first of all, let us create a widget for the second screen, and this time we are going to create a separate file for it. And as I have already told you, we have to write all our Dart code for our app inside this folder named lib. So create a new file. Let's name it second_screen.dart. And inside we are going to create a new stateless widget. And now let us use another shortcut of Android Studio for creating this stateless widget. Start typing STLES, press Ctrl and space, and you will find the option to create a stateless widget. We have a similar shortcut for creating a stateful widget too. We only have to type STFUL and we will get the option to create a new stateful widget. So let us create a stateless widget. Let's call it second screen. Import material.dart to be able to access these classes. And as we have created it using this shortcut, this build function is already implemented and a widget named container is being returned from this build function. So this is a widget you are going to use very often while developing Flutter apps. You can create a box using this widget container, and there are lots of properties to customize this. If you want to display some color behind some text, then you can put that text inside this container. You can make the text widget a child of this widget container and then add a color to the property color of the container, and we'll have a color to the background of the text. This widget has many different properties for customization, making it a very useful widget. Now let's come back to our first screen widget. We are going to load the new screen on clicking this button. And for that, as I have mentioned, we have to use the class called navigator. You can create an instance of navigator yourself, but you don't need to, because this material app widget creates one for the complete app. And we can access that by calling navigator.off and by passing the context to it. An instance of the class build context is passed to this build function by the framework, and we can pass that to this function navigator.off. An instance of this class build context provides information about the location of the widget on the widget tree. This gives us an instance of the navigator state class, and we can call the function push on it to push a new route to the stack. We have to pass an instance of route to this function push. So we cannot pass the widget directly. We have to convert our widget to a route, and for that we can use a class named material page route. While creating the instance of the class material page route, we have to provide an implementation of a function to the property called builder. This function has a specific syntax. It gets the context as an argument, so we have to add the parameter to hold the context, and we have to return the widget that we want to load as a new route from this function. So return an instance of the widget second screen from this builder function. Now save the changes and click on this button, and the new page gets loaded. Now the next question is how to pass some data from the first screen to the second screen. Let's consider that we want to pass a string, and for that, inside the second screen we are going to create a field to hold the value that will be passed from the first screen. So in this case we are going to create a variable of type string, because we will be passing a string from the first screen, and then we shall initialize that string inside the constructor. So inside the body of the constructor we shall write this dot text equal to text. So this is the argument, and this one is this field. Now this way of initializing variables using the constructor is so common that Dart has come up with an easier way. We simply need to add this dot text inside the parameter list itself, and we don't even need this body. Now we are going to display this text on our screen. So let's add a text widget as the child of the container and pass this variable text to this text widget. Now inside the first screen widget we already have an error, because while creating the instance of the class second screen we have to pass a string as the argument. So let us pass a string. Now save the changes, click on the button, and notice this text being displayed on the screen. But this screen still does not look good, does not look like a page of our app, and you already know how to make this look like the first screen, right? We have to return an instance of this scaffold widget, and to the body of this scaffold we have to add this widget tree, and we can add an app bar using the property app bar, to which we have to pass an instance of the class app bar, and to the property title of the class app bar we have to pass an instance of text for the title of the app bar. Now you may be already wondering about this keyword here, late. So what is this? This is a part of null safety. So Dart is a null safe language. You cannot assign null to a variable without explicitly specifying it to be nullable. And the reason for this restriction is that null references are causes of many errors. Sir Tony Hoare, the inventor of null references himself, mentioned the invention of null reference to be $1 billion mistake. You can read more about this on the Wikipedia article on Sir Tony Hoare. You can make a variable nullable by adding this question mark to the end of the type. But you should not do that if this is not the ultimate option that you have. because the purpose of null safety itself is to avoid use of null as much as possible. So a better approach is to use the keyword late. This tells the compiler that we have not initialized the variable now, but we are going to initialize it soon before we use this variable. So don't worry about null references now. Next, I am going to show you how to display a list of items in Flutter. So there is an inbuilt widget in Flutter named list view, using which you can display a list of items. And there are different ways for creating an instance of list view, and each of these approaches are suitable for different types of list. For example, if you want to display a small number of items in a list, this default constructor is the best option. You have to create an instance of list view using this default constructor. But if the number of items to be displayed is large and you don't exactly know how many items you will need to display, which may be a case when you are fetching some item, maybe some blog post from the internet, and then displaying them on the list. In such a case, this default constructor will not work, will not be suitable. So in such a case, you have to create an instance of the list view using the constructor called builder. And this third one that I have showed helps us in displaying dividers in between the items of the list. Now you may display them yourself. You may, without even using this constructor, you may add the divider widget in the layout of the individual items. But this constructor reduces some of our work. It helps in creating such a list where we have the divider in between the list items. So we are going to start with this first one. We shall display a small number of items using this default constructor. Let's display the list inside the second screen widget. So open this file second screen.dart, and here to the body of this scaffold widget, pass an instance of the list view and create the instance using this default constructor. This widget have a property named children, which can take a list of widgets similar to the way column does. So to the list, we have to pass the widgets that we want to display on the list. So let's add a few text widgets, and you can combine multiple different widgets here. Now save the changes and notice the list being displayed on the page. So now you know how to display a small list of items in Flutter using the list view widget. Let me show you how to display a long list of items. We are going to use the constructor builder. Let us display the list of countries in the world. I have copied the list from a gist. I'll put the link to that gist in the description. Now let me paste the list here. So here I have a variable named country list which holds the list of countries. Now we are going to display this list on the UI using a list view widget. So don't confuse between this list and the widget and the class list view. List is the collection, it is the data structure of the language Dart, and list view is the widget, a component of the Flutter framework using which we can display a list on the UI. Let's remove this instance of list view and create an instance of the list view class using the constructor builder. To this constructor, we have to pass an implementation of a function to this parameter item builder. So this function is responsible for creating the layout of the individual items of the list. And this function should have a specific syntax, because when this function is called by the framework, an instance of the build context and the index of the corresponding item of the list is passed to this function. So we can use this index inside to access the values from this list of countries and display the text, display the name of the countries inside the text widget. And from this item builder function, we have to return the widget tree representing the layout of the individual items of the list. So let's try returning a text widget. And we shall try to get the names of the countries from the country list using this index. So let's create a string to hold the name of the country, name of the individual countries, and get the value from the country list using this index, and pass this country name to this constructor of the text widget. And we also have to pass a value for the parameter item count. This defines the number of items in the list. So let us pass country list dot length. Now save this, and here we have the list of countries being displayed on the screen. So this is the best option to display a long list of items in Flutter. And we have seen that this function item builder is responsible for creating the layout for the individual items of the list. We have to return the widget tree representing the layout of the individual items from this function. At this moment we have created a simple layout for the items. We only have a single text widget and we are returning an instance of the text widget from this function. Now you can customize this to a complex tree of widgets, creating a beautiful layout for the individual items of the list. But there is a common pattern of the list items. So often we display a title, a bigger text, and then below the text we display small text, and sometimes we also display an image at the beginning and maybe some icon at the end. So this is a common structure of the UI of the individual items of the lists. And you can create such a list using the column widget, the row widget, the images and text, and you can compose this widget and create such a layout. But this is so common that Flutter has provided an inbuilt widget using which we can easily create such a layout. So the widget we have is named list style. So let us use this list style widget to create such a layout for the items of our list. Return an instance of this widget list style from this item builder function. The widget has a property called title, to which we have to pass the text that we want to be displayed as the main text, and below it we want to display small text. For that we have to use the property called subtitle, to which again we have to pass a text widget with the text to be displayed below the title. Then we can use the property called leading to display a widget at the beginning of the title. We shall display an image here, but for now let's display a box. So we are going to use the container widget, specify the height and width and the color. To specify a color you can use the class called colors. This class contains some of the common material design colors. So type colors, add a dot, and you should see the list of the colors that exist inside this class. And to display an icon at the end, we can use the property called trailing, to which we can pass any widget. So let's try passing an instance of the widget called icon. We can display icons using this widget icon. While creating the instance of the widget icon to the constructor, we have to pass the icon data of an icon. So the icon data represents the icons, and we can find some of the common material design icons inside the class named icons. So type icons, add the dot, and the ID should show you the different available icons inside the class. So use one from here. Save the changes and notice that we have a beautiful layout for the items of our list. Now let us also try the constructor separated, which helps us in displaying a divider between the items of the list. So change this builder to separated, and here too we have to pass this item count and item builder for creating the layouts of the items of the list. Additionally, we have to pass an implementation of a function to the property called separator builder. To this we have to pass an implementation of a function, and this function is responsible for creating the layout for this separator, for the widget to be displayed between the items. This too gets a context and an index, and we have to return the widget which we want to display as the separator between the list items. So let us return an instance of the inbuilt widget called divider, and this looks like this one. We can display a horizontal line using this widget. Now let me answer the last question of this video: how to fetch some data from the internet and then display them on the UI. So we are going to fetch some items from the internet from a REST API, and then we shall display them on the UI using a list view. We are going to fetch a list of blog posts, and for that we are going to use a fake API. So there is a website called jasonplaceholder.typecode.com, and they provide some fake APIs which you can use to test the network interactions of your app. If you already have an API for your backend, then it's fine, you can use that. If you don't have, you just want to test how to make connections, how to make API requests from an app or from any code, then you can use this fake APIs. So here we have a few of them for post, named posts, then comments, albums, photos, to-dos, users, and let's use this one, posts. If you click on this, you will find an array, a JSON array of blog posts. So each individual post contains a user ID, then ID, title, and body. We are going to fetch these items, this blog post, and we are going to display the title on the title of a list style, and then on the subtitle we are going to display this body. Now we have an API endpoint which provides us a list of blog posts, and now we have to make HTTP request to this API endpoint. And for making HTTP requests, we are going to use a package called HTTP. So packages are some code which is not a part of the framework but can be integrated with a Flutter app to enhance its capabilities. The packages are created to perform some of the common tasks, for example, network interactions or interactions with local databases, etc. You can find the Flutter packages on the website called pub.dev, and these packages can be written by anyone. In this website you will find packages written by the Flutter team, you will find packages by other developers, and you can even create your own package and publish it on pub.dev. So open the website pub.dev and search for HTTP. Click on this one, and here you will find different information about the package. You will get the instructions of how to use and examples of how to use this package. If you click on this tab, installing, you will find the specific instructions to integrate it with your app. There are two ways you can integrate this package with your app. So the first is by manually adding this dependency inside the pubspec.yaml file. Let me show you that. Copy this line and open the project. Click on this button to open the directory structure, and here you will find the file named pubspec.yaml file. This is kind of a configuration file. So inside this we have to mention the different dependencies which we want to integrate with our app and different resources that our app is going to use. Inside this file you will find a section named dependencies. Inside this section we have to add the dependency, and by dependency I mean the package on which the app depends. So in this case we have a dependency on a package called HTTP. So add the package at the line that we have copied from the page and paste it here. Now we already have one dependency here named Cupertino icons. Though we are not using this, this gets added by default on creating a new Flutter project. So this provides iOS style icons which we are not using. Now this file is sensitive to indentation, so while adding these dependencies you have to maintain proper indentation. So here maintain the same indentation as the existing dependency, Cupertino icons. Now to install the dependency that we have mentioned here, we have to click on this button, pubget, or we can run the command flutter pubget on the terminal, and it will download and install the dependency on our project. Now let me show you the second approach, which is even simpler. You simply need to run this command flutter pub add http on the terminal, and the dependency will get added automatically. Now as we have added the HTTP package, we can start using the APIs or the functions of the package. So this package HTTP contains functions for the defined HTTP request. It has a function named get to perform HTTP GET request. It has a function to make a post request. It has a function for put request, delete, patch, etc. We are going to call the function get to make a GET request to the API endpoint. We are going to make a GET request, fetch the data, parse them, and display them on the UI. We are going to do this inside this second screen widget. So open the file second screen.dart, and at the top we have to import the package because we are going to use the functions of this package. So we have to import the http.dart library of this package. Now let us try to make a GET request to our API endpoint. For that we have to call the function GET of this HTTP library. Let's add a body to our constructor. Inside the constructor, call the function GET of the HTTP library, and to this function you have to pass a URI. You cannot pass the URL, and for that, to convert the URL to a URI, we have to call the function parse of the class URI, and we have to pass the URL to this function parse. So copy this URL of the API endpoint and paste it here. Pass this URL to the function parse of URI class. Now if you hover over the name of this class GET, a pop-up will appear with some information about the function, or you can even take a look at the source code, and for that you have to keep pressing the control key and then click on the name of the function. This will take you to the source code of this function. You will notice that this function returns an instance of future of type response. So return type is a future of type response. So what does that mean? What is a future? So a future represents some data which is not yet available, which will be available in the future. So by returning future, this function is saying that the data that you are looking for is not yet available. So take this instance of the class future. I'll take some time to complete my task and get the data, and whenever I get it, I'll put the data inside this instance future. So keep looking for the data inside this instance of the future class. So in this case, this function takes a little longer because this is performing some network request, right? It may take longer depending on the speed of the internet and many other factors. And whenever it gets the data, it puts that inside an instance of the class response. So this class response has a field named body. To that field, it will assign the data, the list of items. And then it will put that instance of the response class inside the instance of the future. So we have to keep looking for the data to arrive inside this future instance. And for that we can use the callback functions of the future class. So let's create an instance of the future here to hold the data. And call the function then of the future instance. To this function then we have to pass an implementation of a function which will be called when the data arrives. So whenever this function is called, the value that we are looking for, the instance of the class response in this case, will be passed as the argument to this function, and we can use that inside the function body. So here you can try printing the value, printing the data. Add a print statement and pass the value of the field body of this instance, value.body. So this is an instance of the class response. Now run the app and take a look at the console. Now when you load the second screen, you will notice the data from the API getting printed on the console. This may take a little while depending on the internet speed of your device, but the blog posts are getting printed on the console. So this is one way of working with asynchronous functions in Flutter. There is another way, and I'll tell you about that too. But before that, in case you have no idea about an asynchronous function, let me briefly explain it to you. In simple words, an asynchronous function does not block the execution, whereas a synchronous function blocks the execution. So the code that we usually write are synchronous. The instructions are executed in a particular order, one after another. So let's consider that we have a few lines of code and they are getting executed one after the other, and in between the code there is a call to a function which is synchronous, and that takes a little longer. Then the next instruction, the instruction below that function call, would get executed only after completion of this complete function. So if that function takes 2 minutes to get executed, then this function, then we would have to wait for 2 minutes until the completion of this synchronous function, and then only this next instruction will get executed. But with asynchronous function, this is not the case. So if this were an asynchronous function, the next instruction would have got executed immediately without waiting for the completion of this function. So this does not block the execution, and that function itself would have got executed separately, and then there are different ways to handle the result of such an asynchronous function. And one common way is using callback function, as we have seen here. An asynchronous function is useful when it takes a little longer to complete its task. For example, performing network requests or working with the databases. Imagine what would have happened if this function get were a synchronous function. So this would have blocked the execution on this line. So the code below this line won't get executed until this function get completes its task. So we have this build function here where we are creating the layout, and this too wouldn't have got executed, and thus we won't have the layout being displayed. So the app would have got frozen, and that is not at all a good experience, right? And thus this type of functions are often defined to be asynchronous. Now if you take a look at any Flutter code, you will notice another approach of working with asynchronous functions. You will notice the keywords async and await. Let me show you that approach too. And for that, I'll create a separate function, and let me collapse this block of code, this build function, for clarity. Let's create a new function. Let's name it getRequest and move this code from this constructor's body to this function. And inside this constructor's body, call the new function getRequest. Now run the app, and this will behave the same as before. This will print the response on the console. Now consider that this function getRequest is asynchronous. So while executing this constructor in this line, while calling this function, this is not going to block the execution. So the build function will get executed immediately, and we will have the layout. This will not freeze the UI, right? Now inside this function getRequest, if this function get were a synchronous function, would that have created any problem for us? Because in the first statement we are calling this function get, and in the next statement we are calling the function then, and we are passing a callback which gets executed after completion of this function get. So basically we are printing the value of the response that we get from this function, right? And for that we anyway have to wait for its completion, isn't it? So inside this function getRequest, we can treat this code as synchronous code. And in Dart, we can do that using the keyword await and async. Now if we add the keyword await here before calling the function get, then this code will be treated as a synchronous code. The execution will wait here until the completion of this function before proceeding to the next statement. And as we have noticed that we already have an error, and this is because when you use this keyword await, we don't immediately get an instance of future. So the execution waits until completion of this function, and once the function completes, we get the instance of the response itself. So here we have to change this type to response instead of a future. And as this is response, not a future, we cannot call the function then. So in the next statement, we simply can call the function print and pass response future.body. You can even change this name so that this does not create any confusion. Now we have one more error here, and this is because when we use await inside a function, we have to mark this function as asynchronous with this keyword async. So here I have told you to assume that this function is asynchronous, and now using this keyword we have already specified this function to be asynchronous. So here this is not going to block the execution, and inside this function, this second statement of printing the response will get executed only after completion of this function get. Now if you run the app and load the second screen, then you will notice that the app is behaving the same. So there is no difference, and both of these approaches are correct. The second approach of using await and async is a little more readable. The code looks cleaner and it is easier to understand. Now we know how to make a GET request to an API endpoint, and we have got the data. Next, we have to display that data on the UI. And you may already be thinking that we can convert our widget to a stateful widget, and we can use a list to hold the list of items, and then here we can update the list once we get the data, and then refresh the UI using the setState function. And that is one way, but there is a better way. Flutter provides a widget named Future Builder to display data asynchronously on the UI. Let me show you how to use that. First, let's remove this function because we no longer need this. I added this function to demonstrate how asynchronous functions work in Flutter and what is the future. So let's remove this function, and inside this build function to the parameter body of scaffold, we have to pass an instance of Future Builder. For the time being, just comment this portion, the list view. We shall need it later, or you can copy and keep it somewhere else. So here, add an instance of the class Future Builder. We have to pass values for two of the properties. First is future and the other is builder. To the parameter future, we have to pass a future, and to the builder we have to pass an implementation of a function which is responsible for creating the layout. The get function of the HTTP library returns a future, right? And we are going to pass that future to this parameter future of the Future Builder widget. And for that, let's create a field of type future of type response. Let's name it blog posts future. Inside the constructor, let's assign the value returned by the function get to this variable blog post future. And we are getting an error here because we have to use the keyword late. Now while creating the instance of Future Builder, to the parameter future, pass this future, blog post future. Also specify the type response here, and to the parameter builder we have to pass an implementation of a function, and this function, when it gets called, it gets two arguments. First is a context and second is an instance of the class async snapshot. The data that we are looking for will be available inside this instance of async snapshot class. So in this case, this function get, after completion of its task, creates an instance of the class response, and that instance this time will be available inside this instance of async snapshot. This has a field named data, and the response of this function will be available inside that field. From this builder function, we have to return the widgets that we want to load on the screen. And that may be a widget tree with a single widget or a complex widget tree depending on the layout that we are creating. In this case, we are going to return 3 different widget trees depending on 3 different conditions. First is a case of error. So when an error occurs, we are going to display a text message on the screen. And for that, we are going to return an instance of text widget. Second is the actual layout. So when we get data, then we are going to display that data on a list. So we are going to return an instance of list view. And third is a loader, a progress indicator. So we shall display a loader until we get the data. Now to check if an error has occurred, we are going to add an if statement and we shall check if the value of the boolean called has error of the snapshot instance is true. So if snapshot.hasError is true, then some error has occurred and we are going to return an instance of the text widget. So if an error occurs during the asynchronous operation, then this will be true and this if block will get executed. If this is false, then this if block will be skipped and then we shall check if we have the data. And for that we have a getter named hasData. So snapshot.hasData is true when the data has already arrived. From this if block, we shall return the widget tree representing the layout for displaying the fetched data. So in this case, inside this if block, we shall fetch the blog post and then we shall return a list view for displaying those blog posts. And we already had a list view here. I have commented it out and now I am going to copy it and return this list view from this if block. At this moment, this list view is displaying the country list, but we are going to fetch the data from this instance, fetch the list of blog posts and display those here. But before that, let me show you the other condition, other situation when we neither have any error and the data too has not yet arrived. In such a situation, we are going to display a loader. So outside of this two if blocks, at the end of this function, we are going to add a return statement and we are going to return a circular progress indicator, an instance of this widget circular progress indicator. This widget displays a progress indicator, a loader, and to place it at center, we can wrap this with the widget center. I shall also wrap this text widget for error message by the center widget. Now inside this if block, when snapshot.hasData is true, we are going to get the data that we are looking for. In this case, an instance of the class response returned by the function get of the HTTP library inside the field data of the snapshot instance. So create a variable of type response and assign snapshot.data to it. Now we already know that response.body contains the actual data that we are looking for. But response.body contains the data in form of a JSON string. So we are going to use an inbuilt library named convert to convert the JSON string to a list of maps. And for that, at the top, we have to import the library Dart convert. Now here inside this if block, create a list, let's name it posts, and assign the result of passing response.body to JSON decode. This function JSON decode belongs to the library convert. Now to the parameter item count of the constructor separated of list view, pass post.length, the length of this list post. Now inside this item builder function, we shall get the individual blog posts from the list post by this index, and then we shall pass the title and the body of this blog post to these text widgets. You can get an item of a list at a particular index using this syntax, and in a similar way we are going to get the values against the corresponding keys from this blog post. So here we are going to pass each post, and then inside square bracket we are going to pass the key title to get the title. Similarly, each post body for the body. So these two are the keys defined by the API. Now save the changes and notice that the blog posts are getting displayed on the UI. Now let me show you how to display an image in Flutter. So we are going to display an image in place of this box. So we are going to remove this container widget which is being passed to the parameter leading of the list style, and we are going to add an instance of the widget image here. So Flutter provides a widget named image for loading images from different sources. So this class image has different constructors to load images from different sources. To load an image from a file, memory, and then from a folder of the project itself, and then we have a constructor network to load an image from the internet. We are going to use this, so we are going to call image.network, and to this constructor we have to pass the URL of the image. So I have copied one URL to an image and I'll paste it here. Now save this and the image appears on our list. So you have got an overview of how things work in Flutter. Next, you may want to learn how to create complex layouts. More about creating layouts in Flutter. You may also want to learn about the other HTTP requests. We have learned about GET request only. You may want to learn how to make POST requests, how to use forms. You may also want to learn how to integrate Firebase with your app, how to use SQLite local databases, how to use shared preferences, and you may also want to learn how to implement authentication in your app, etc. And for all of this, I'll be creating videos and I'll put the links in the description of this video. And you may also consider subscribing and hit the bell icon to get notified. Thanks for watching.